Hi there. Looking around on social media these days, you get a lot of negativity about the UK, particularly from British people that live here. They all aspire to move to Australia, or they aspire to move to Spain, or they aspire to go anywhere. This is from the rich right down to the poor. I mean, the rich want to leave because they don't want to pay any tax. The poor want to leave because they have a perceived impression that their life will be so much better elsewhere. Now, I've lived in Australia and I've lived in the US and I've lived in the UK. And this is actually one of the best countries on earth. And Britain is certainly not broken. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. The definition of broken means that your society doesn't work. In our case, of course, all of our institutions still operate normally. We have the legal system, the law enforcement services, the criminal system, everything works. The NHS is not perfect. The NHS needs investment, but the NHS is still a free health service, which most of the world envy. Universities here are known throughout the world as being the best of breed. People aspire to go to Oxford and Cambridge and Edinburgh and Exeter and all these other universities that are around the country. There's hundreds of them. And they churn out some of the best educated people on earth. Why do you think the rich in other countries send their children here to be educated? Because the British education system is second to none. That's why. Now, the other thing is, from an entrepreneurial perspective, of course, which is where I sit in my space, there is no better place on earth, excuse the cat in the background, there is no better place on earth for startups. It's a very startup-friendly environment here. So if you've got a good idea and you want to give it a lash, the UK is very welcoming. It's very cheap to open a business here. It's very cheap to set up a company name and a company structure and so on, and give your idea a shot. Now, a lot of people are afraid to do that for a lot of reasons. I mean, a lot of people have great ideas, but they never see the light of day, predominantly because they are embarrassed that if it fails, they're going to look silly, or they think that it's going to cost them their house, so therefore if it fails. But again, this is very much a British mindset. It's a if it fails mindset as opposed to when it succeeds mindset. Now, I have actually developed an app which will help with that. It's called prototry.com. Prototry.app. It's called prototry.app, which allows you to actually simulate business ideas before you spend a single penny and before you tell anyone about your idea, so that there's no embarrassment or anything like that involved in it. Anyway, moving on from Prototry, because, I mean, that's just an aside. People in the community still care. I mean, there are litter-picking people. There are people that clean road signs. There are people that look after the elderly in their community. There's still home food delivery services. There's still a willingness to queue and take your turn when you're lining up for things. Society, for the most part, works. The country is incredibly innovative. That's being shown now through the Clean Energy Bill. The UK is becoming a world leader in clean energy. Contrary to what Trump and the others say about fossil fuels, the fact is that clean energy is the way forward. It's the cheapest form of energy you can get. I mean, I happen to be someone that actually likes the look of wind turbines. Now, I know a lot of people don't, and that's fine. I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion. But regardless of that, wave energy, wind, solar, the combination of those three alone, and thermal in some parts of the world, of course, mean that we can go forward into the future with the knowledge that we're not making the planet any worse, and certainly our own environment. As much as I think electric cars are a bit of a stopgap between now and hydrogen, electric cars have one massive benefit for communities. Even though they may be charged through coal-fired power stations and so on, the actual environment in which you live is a lot cleaner because they're not emitting exhaust fumes into your garden every time they go past your house. So I think Britain's focus on clean energy and the future is a really good one. Now, this is something that in the world of AI and the world of high tech is all going to come back and pay dividends, but it's a long game. There are no quick fixes for any Western country that's facing crises at the moment. And what you have to do is you've got to look at what's going to fix the problems over time. First thing you have to do, of course, is acknowledge there are problems. And of course, Britain's got problems. Everyone's got problems, but it's all a matter of degree. If you look at our economy, it's incredibly resilient. Our economy has gone through the financial crisis of 2008, which nearly destroyed the whole world. There were only two countries that didn't suffer from that, and that was Canada and Australia, because they both had very robust banking systems. But we've survived that. We survived leaving the European Union, albeit in a much depleted financial state, and both economically and socially it's been a disaster in my opinion, but we're still here. And we survived the COVID crisis. And during the COVID crisis, right or wrong, the government borrowed lots and lots of money to keep people paid so that they didn't starve to death during that whole process. So as stressful as it was, you could have been in a lot worse place in the world than the UK to work your way through COVID. The other thing is we have an incredible resource in the young people. We've probably got one of the highest educated group of young people in the world. Most people go to university. Now, that's not necessarily great for everyone. University is certainly not for everyone. And I think that there needs to be more apprenticeship-style programs in the country to ensure that trade skills and things are carried forward into the future. But having said that, education gives you choice. So if you're educated, you can choose to be a sparky, or you can choose to be a bus driver, you can choose to be a garbologist, or you can choose to be an executive in London or something like that. But you've got choice. Without education, you don't have choice. So education is a good thing, whichever way you look at it. Every country that actually educates their populace is better for it. And the other thing is, the UK is constantly reinventing itself. If you look at England or the UK from hundreds of years ago, when they had an empire, right up till today, it's been a constant evolution of changing society and changing norms. And I think to the expectation that we're going to be living in some 1950s bubble, which never actually existed in the first place, is just unrealistic. The world's changing around us. We have to change with it. The world won't change for us, so we have to change with the world in order to capitalise on the opportunities that then provides. And that's everything from immigration through to AI implementation, through to clean energy, through to changing laws, hopefully rejoining the EU to secure our security in an ever-changing world. Mark Carney said at the Davos conference that middle powers have the power to change the world, and they do, but they have to work together. No one is an island, and that was one of the big mistakes of Brexit, of course, is that the UK wrongly assumed that they could go it alone. Now, that's exactly what Donald Trump's trying to do with America. It never has worked. It won't work this time either. So we have a lot of power when we actually work with our Commonwealth partners and with the European Union as well. Now, people in this country are quite angry, and I think they're angry for a number of reasons. One is they're impatient for change, or they're impatient to turn the clock back. So, if you're an older person like I am, I'm not of this mindset, but a hell of a lot of people of my age would like to turn the clock back to the 1950s and say everything was better then. We didn't have any brown faces on the street, so obviously everything had to be better. Well, that's just ridiculous. We should be a welcoming, multicultural society, which we have been predominantly for most of the last century, and the country's benefited enormously financially, economically, socially, and educatively through that process of immigration. Now, of course, unfettered immigration is not a good thing, so it has to be done properly, and that's an area of learning, I think, for the whole Western world right now. They're trying to work out how to make immigration work for their individual societies without pulling the countries apart. And, that's one of the things that social media has done, is that social media has created a whole bunch of echo chambers where people never listen to an opposite point of view. I'm guilty of that. I think everyone's guilty of it. And as a result, xenophobic tendencies find fuel for their fire, and it's very easy to blame everything about your society on a minority. When Adolf Hitler did it to the extreme with the Jews, Trump's trying to do it with immigrants. The right wing in this country are trying to do it with immigrants as well. And ultimately, it's doomed to failure because they're not the problem. The problem is deeper than that, and you need to address the root cause as opposed to blaming minorities for your problems. The other thing is, and no one will want to hear this, but there are a hell of a lot of people in this country that don't want to do anything. They want to sit on their bums, get benefits, get whatever, and not contribute or not even try to contribute. And I think that there's a number of reasons for that as well. One is if you're a long-term unemployed, you lose the ability to have much positive thought. Now, that's through no fault of your own. I know people that have gone for 600, 700, 800 jobs and been knocked back every time. Now, if that happened to you and you got kicked in the head 800 times, you'd say, well, that hurts. I'm going to stop trying to be kicked in the head. So you just give up. But the problem is that local government, central government, has to find a way to remotivate those people to take part in society. Because as soon as you start taking part, as soon as you start doing anything positive, all of a sudden your whole world changes. And that's just a fact. You can dwell in self-pity and think that I better move to Australia because it'll be better. Well, I've got some bad news for you. If you move to Australia, they want you to work. and if you're not prepared to, you're in for the shock of your lives and you'll end up back here in the UK anyway. Ping pong poms, they call them. So people that go to Australia think, oh my God, this isn't what I thought it was, and then come back to the UK again. I think we should also acknowledge that we're actually lucky to live here. We live in a Western democracy. We have freedom of speech. We've got freedom to do almost anything we want. And before anyone craps on about social media freedom of speech and getting arrested for posts and all that rubbish, they're not getting arrested for lack of freedom of speech. They're getting arrested for hate. And freedom of speech does not equal hate speech. Just because you've got freedom of speech doesn't mean that you should be allowed to put stuff out on social media that is potentially going to hurt somebody else. So I don't have any issues with that. The other thing about the UK, of course, is it's stunningly beautiful. I mean, we live in one of the prettiest countries on earth with a history that is just divine. Whether you go from the top of Scotland down to the bottom of the UK and across to even Northern Ireland to Belfast, it's a beautiful city. Everything about this country is gorgeous. And I think from a visual perspective, and I think that the Greenbelt laws have been good in maintaining that. They need to obviously, as they are now, investigate brown belt construction as the population grows and industry grows and so on and so forth. But ultimately, the UK is like any other place on earth, whether it be Australia, the US, Afghanistan, Russia. Here, doesn't matter where it is. You get out of a country what you put into it. So if you're prepared to put something back, if you're prepared to actually be positive about where you live, you'll reap the benefits. And then the country will start to work for you rather than against you. If you do the opposite, you'll get exactly what you expect. There is a saying that no matter what you think, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. If you think you can and you have a positive attitude, the UK is a great place to do it. If you think you can't, it'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy.